This is the story of Jennifer. For 30 years in New York City, she carried the guilt of one decision and convinced herself love wasn't meant for her, until she met a man who refused to let her hide, and the past she never let go found her.
The rain came down hard on Manhattan that Thursday. Not the kind of rain that apologizes, the kind that means it. It hammered the windows of Lenox Hill Hospital and turned the streets outside into dark, running mirrors, reflecting ambulance lights in bleeding streaks of red and white. Jennifer Carlson moved through the ER like she always did, like the floor belonged to her, not with arrogance, with ownership, the kind earned through 20 years of not sleeping, not stopping, not breaking. Her curls were pinned back, her scrubs pressed, her dark eyes scanning. Every corner of the room before her feet had fully carried her through the door. She had a gift for reading a room before it read her. "What have we got?" she asked, not looking up from the chart thrust into her hands. "Male 35, the resident said, breathless, scrambling beside her. Collapsed at a restaurant on 68th. BP was 80/50 on arrival. Possible internal bleed, they're not sure yet." "They're never sure," she said. She pushed through the curtain, and there he was. He was stretched out on the gurney, looking like a man who had never once imagined a hospital ceiling would be what he'd stare at tonight. Pale, sandy-haired, jaw tight with the effort of staying conscious. His shirt had been cut open. Expensive fabric, she noted clinically, the kind of detail her mind filed without permission. Blue eyes that found her face the moment she walked in, and stayed there. "Mr. Morrison," she said. Her voice was even, professional, warm in the practiced way that calmed people without promising them anything. "I'm Dr. Carlson. I need you to stay with me, okay?" "I'm trying," he said, dry, almost amused even now. She almost smiled. She didn't. She worked fast and quietly, the way she always did, her hands certain where everything else was chaos. His pressure was dropping. She called it, ordered the labs, moved the team with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this, long enough that urgency no longer looked like panic on her face. It looked like stillness. "You're going to be all right," she told him, because she already knew he would be, and because people needed to hear it even when it was true. "You sound like you mean that," he murmured. "I always mean what I say." His eyes closed. 3 hours later, he was stable. She stood at the sink outside his room, washing her hands, feeling the particular exhaustion of a crisis resolved, the kind that only hits once the adrenaline finally releases its grip. The ER had quieted to its low hum. Rain still clawed at the windows. She heard footsteps, urgent, not running. The specific rhythm of someone who had received a call they'd prayed would not come. She turned. He was young. Light brown skin, dark, serious eyes, wearing a coat that was damp at the shoulders from the rain. He scanned the corridor with the controlled terror of a man who had learned long ago how to carry fear quietly. He looked about 30, and something old and unnamed moved through her chest before she could stop it, the quiet arithmetic she could never escape. Her son would be about that age now, wherever he was. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was deep, steady, but barely. "I'm looking for my brother, Charles Morrison. They said he was brought here." Jennifer studied him for just a moment, the set of his jaw, the way his hands hung at his sides in careful fists. "He's stable," she said. "He's resting. I'm Dr. Carlson. I was his attending tonight." The breath that left him was enormous. He pressed a hand briefly to his forehead and looked away, composing himself with the practiced dignity of a man who did not fall apart in front of strangers. "Thank you," he said. He said it like he meant every syllable. "Can I see him? Give us 20 minutes. He nodded and sat in the corridor chair without another word, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. She watched him for just a second longer than necessary. Something about him pulled at a place she didn't have a name for. She shook it off and walked away. When she finally let him in, she stood briefly in the doorway. Charles Morrison, pale against white hospital sheets, managed a weak smile the moment his brother's face appeared. The younger man crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped his brother's hand with both of his, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "You scared me," Anthony said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're in a hospital bed." Technicality. Jennifer turned to leave them. "Doctor." She paused. Charles's voice thin but deliberate. "Thank you for tonight." She looked back at him. Blue eyes still finding her face, still staying there. with that same quiet stubbornness that had registered somewhere in her chest before she'd had the chance to stop it. "That's my job, Mr. Morrison." She said it gently. Finally, she walked out into the rain-streaked corridor, and the ER swallowed her whole again. She did not think about him. She told herself that twice. 3 days after his discharge, he walked back through the front doors of Lenox Hill. Jennifer saw him before he saw her. She was standing at the nurse's station reviewing charts when the elevator doors opened and Charles Morrison stepped out. No gurney, no crisis, no pale emergency pallor, just a man in a charcoal coat. Color returned to his face, moving through the hospital corridor with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided something and was no longer negotiating with himself about it. Her pen stopped moving. He spotted her, and something in his expression settled, like a compass finding north. She looked back down at her chart. "Dr. Carlson." "Mr. Morrison," she said. She didn't look up. "You should be resting. Your discharge notes were clear." "I'm rested." He stopped at the counter. "I came to thank you properly. You thanked me in the room. That was adequate. I wanted proper." She looked up then, because the tone of it required a look, measured, direct, unbothered by her coolness. He was holding a brown paper bag that smelled, against all professionalism, extraordinary. "That better not be for me." "Coffee and a croissant from the place on 77th. He set it on the counter. "I asked the nurse what you take." She said black, no sugar. "You asked my nurse." She volunteered. Jennifer stared at the bag, then at him. Then she picked it up, turned and handed it to the resident behind her. "Thank you for the gesture, Mr. Morrison. Take care of yourself." She walked away. He came back the next day. No bag this time, just himself, standing near the elevator when she came off her rounds, as though he simply happened to be there, which they both knew was untrue. "You're a patient, not staff," she said without stopping. "You can't keep coming here. I'm not a patient anymore. I'm a civilian." "Then this is trespassing. The lobby is public." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. She gave him the look, the one that had silenced residents, quieted grieving families, and ended conversations before they became problems. It was a formidable look. He received it without flinching. "Mr. Morrison," her voice was quiet and absolute, "I'm going to be very clear with you. Whatever you think this is, I'd like to take you to coffee," he said simply. "One coffee. Across the street. That's all I'm asking." "No." "Why?" "Because you're 35 and I'm 49. She said it flatly, like a diagnosis. "Because you were my patient 2 weeks ago." "Because the answer is no." He was quiet for a beat. "The 14 years don't scare me." "They should." "Why should someone else's opinion about a number scare me?" She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window behind him, Manhattan moved in its relentless way. Cabs, umbrellas, pigeons, indifferent to everything. "Go home, Mr. Morrison." She walked away again. He came back the day after that. On the 4th visit, she stopped pretending to be surprised. She found him in the corridor with 2 coffees, leaning against the wall like he belonged there, and something about the absolute lack of performance in him. No flowers, no grand gestures, just a man and 2 cups and the quiet refusal to disappear. Made her angrier than she wanted to admit. "This is inappropriate," she said, taking one of the cups before she'd made a conscious decision to. Something crossed his face. Not triumph, relief. "I know," he said. "I don't care." She sipped the coffee. It was perfect. She hated that it was perfect. "You're a grown man behaving like someone who met a woman who took his breath away while saving his life." He finished. He looked at her steadily. "Yes, apparently that's what I'm doing. Flattery, it isn't flattery. I'm not trying to charm you. I'm telling you the truth because I think you can handle it." He paused. "You're extraordinary. You walk into a room and everything recalibrates. I noticed it when I could barely keep my eyes open. And I noticed it every day since. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't. The honesty of it landed somewhere she didn't want it to." She looked away, jaw tight. "I've been married," she said, her voice losing some of its armor without her permission. "It lasted 5 years before he walked away. And the man before that, he looked me in the face one day and chose to disappear." She stopped, reset. "Whatever you think you're feeling, Charles, it is a disaster waiting for a location." His name in her mouth surprised them both. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I'd rather be in the disaster with you than comfortable somewhere without you. She stared at him. Outside, a siren wailed past on 77th, and New York kept moving, indifferent and relentless the way it always did. Go find women your age. Live your life. You're young. I don't want young. His eyes didn't move from hers. I want real. She handed him back the empty cup. Good night, Mr. Morrison. She walked away, but this time just before she turned the corner, without fully understanding why, she didn't tell him not to come back. The Harlem apartment was quiet, the way only late nights could make it. It was past midnight. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened 5 floors below, and the occasional headlight swept across Jennifer's ceiling, like something searching. She sat at her kitchen table in a worn university t-shirt and cotton pants, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She hadn't touched it in an hour. Simone had gone to bed. The apartment breathed in the slow, settled way it did when it was just Jennifer and the silence, and all the things the silence carried. She got up and moved to the window. Manhattan never fully slept. She had always found a strange comfort in that. The city's refusal to go quiet had matched something in her for 30 years. As long as New York kept moving, she had a reason to keep moving too. No stillness. No space for the things that lived in stillness. But tonight the stillness had found her anyway. She pressed her forehead gently against the cool glass and closed her eyes. 30 years. He would be 30 years old now. She had done that math so many times, it had worn grooves into her mind. 30 years old. He could be anywhere in this city. He could have walked past her on Lenox Avenue. Could have been a face in the subway, a voice in a crowd. She would not know him. That was the thing that never got easier. Not the giving away. She had made peace, painful and imperfect, with the circumstances that forced that decision. 19 years old. No money, no family support. A man who looked her in the face and told her the child wasn't his. She had been so alone that the loneliness had its own weight, its own climate. She had held her baby once, counted his fingers, pressed her lips to his forehead, and memorized the warmth of him. And then she had signed the paper. She turned from the window and moved down the hall, stopping at the small closet beside the bathroom. She stood there a moment before opening it, the way you pause before something that has the power to undo you. On the top shelf, behind spare linens and a broken clock she kept meaning to throw away, was a shoebox. She took it down, sat on the edge of her bed and lifted the lid. Inside, letters. 12 of them, each one handwritten in her careful script on plain white paper, each one sealed and addressed to my son, delivered over the years to 3 different adoption agencies with the quiet, desperate hope that one day they would find their way to him. She picked up the earliest one. The paper had softened with age. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll want to. But I need you to know that I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I loved you more than I loved my own right to keep you. I was 19 and I was broke and I was terrified and I had no one. I need you to know that not a single day has passed. She folded it before she finished it. She had memorized every word anyway. She sat with the box in her lap in the dark bedroom and let herself feel it. The grief that she normally outran with 12-hour shifts, and discipline and the sheer velocity of her life. It rose in her chest the way it always did, heavy and familiar, the guilt that had no off switch. She heard Simone's door open, soft footsteps. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, 19 years old, and perceptive in the infuriating way that young women were when they had been raised by complicated mothers. "Mom," she said. Her voice was gentle. "It's almost 1, I know." Simone looked at the shoebox. She knew what it was. She had known since she was old enough to ask and receive an honest answer. She came and sat beside her mother without being invited, and leaned her head against Jennifer's shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Do you think he's okay?" Simone asked quietly. She always asked that. "I have to believe he is," Jennifer said. Her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way. "I have to believe that whoever raised him loved him. That he grew up safe." She paused. "That he doesn't hate me. He doesn't hate you. You don't know that, baby." "I know you," Simone said. She lifted her head and looked at her mother. This woman who had built herself from nothing, who saved lives for a living, who came home and still couldn't save herself from this particular heartbreak. "Anyone who knows you knows you did what you did out of love. Jennifer looked at her daughter. This child she had kept, this deliberate, chosen act of keeping, 14 years after letting go. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. "Go to sleep," she said softly. "You have class." Simone squeezed her hand and left. Jennifer sat alone with the box until the city outside shifted. From the sounds of night to the first grey suggestions of morning. She put the letters away one by one, closed the lid, set it on the shelf. She stood at the bathroom mirror and looked at herself for a long, unflinching moment. 49 years old, dark eyes that had seen too much and were still somehow open. She had built everything from that one devastating beginning. She would not let a blue-eyed man with a croissant and a stubborn heart dismantle the walls that had taken 30 years to build. She believed that, standing at the mirror in the early Harlem morning. She almost believed it completely. He did not give up. That was the thing about Charles Morrison that Jennifer had not accounted for. She had dealt with persistence before, the clumsy, ego-driven kind. That was really just a man refusing to hear no, because no had never been directed at him before. She knew how to dismantle that. She had done it with surgical precision her entire adult life. But Charles was something else. He never pushed. He never sulked. He simply remained. Like weather. Like a constant in an equation she kept trying to solve without him. The first month he found small ways. A message through the hospital's patient portal. She had almost reported it, then read it. "I saw a documentary about surgeons last night and thought of you. You'd have hated the inaccuracies. I did too, on your behalf." She stared at it for longer than she intended. Deleted it. Smiled on the elevator where nobody could see her. He appeared one Saturday on 110th Street, where she bought her groceries. Genuinely by accident. She could tell by the surprise on his face, and instead of manufacturing a moment, he simply said good morning, bought his own groceries, and walked home in the opposite direction. No performance, no agenda. She thought about that for 3 days. The second month, she weakened in small ways she refused to acknowledge. She let him walk her to her car one evening, after a brutal 16-hour shift. The October air was sharp and smelled of roasted nuts from the cart on the corner. He didn't try to fill the silence. He matched her pace and let the city talk instead. Sirens somewhere on 5th, the distant percussion of a jazz musician outside the park. "You must have been something in that ER tonight," he said quietly. "I'm something every night." "I know." He said it without flattery, like fact. She unlocked her car and turned to face him. Under the amber streetlight his face was serious, open, stupidly handsome in a way she had been vigorously not noticing for weeks. "Charles?" She used his name carefully, like a boundary she was drawing in real time. "I'm 14 years older than you. I have a 19-year-old daughter. I've been divorced. I cannot give you children, I won't. And whatever picture you have painted of this. I have 2 daughters," he said quietly. "They lost their mother 3 years ago." A pause, a breath. "I'm not looking for someone to build a new family with, Jennifer. I'm looking for someone real. Someone who makes me feel like the world still has weight to it." He exhaled. "You do that, every time I'm near you." She stood in the cold Manhattan air and felt something move in her chest like a fault line shifting. "I've been alone 14 years, she said. It came out more naked than she intended. 14 years, Charles. Do you understand what that means? It means I built myself a life that fits one person. It means I stopped believing." She stopped. Believing what? She looked away. The streetlight caught the angles of her face, the tiredness in it, the beauty she never thought about because she had never had time. "Good night," she said instead. She drove home. She did not cry. She turned the radio up loud enough to drown out the quiet. The third month, Central Park. He had asked again. She had said yes before fully deciding to, the way you step off a curb before you've looked. They walked the path near the reservoir as the November light turned everything amber and gold. She had her coat pulled close. He walked with his hands in his pockets, unhurried as though this, just this, was already enough for him. She told him about medical school almost by accident, one story leading to another. And he listened the way people rarely listened, not waiting for his turn, but actually inside the story with her. She caught herself laughing at her own memory, and the sound startled her. Low and real. She hadn't heard it in a while. He looked at her when she laughed. "Don't," she said. Don't what? Look at me like that. Like what? Like I'm something. He stopped walking. She stopped too, two people on a path in Central Park, with the whole amber city rising, above the tree line around them. You are something, he said. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever been in the presence of, and I need you to stop being surprised when I notice. The wind moved through the trees. She looked at him, this 35-year-old man with wind-messed hair and honest eyes, and felt it arrive without permission. Warm and terrifying. The first real feeling she had permitted herself in longer than she could honestly remember. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. She did not look at him again that afternoon, but her hand, almost imperceptibly, drifted closer to his as they walked. Neither of them acknowledged it. The city blazed gold around them, and the afternoon stretched long and unhurried, and Jennifer Carlson, for the first time in 14 years, was not entirely sure she wanted it to end. She stopped fighting it somewhere in December, not dramatically, not in a single moment she could point to and say, there, that was when. It happened the way real things happened, gradually and then all at once, like a city waking up. One morning she reached for her phone before her alarm and realized she was looking for his name. She put the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked it back up and texted him. You awake? His response came in 11 seconds. Always for you. She pressed her lips together to stop the smile. It didn't work. December moved through New York like a fever, lights strung across every avenue, the air sharp and glittering, the city wearing its finest and most relentless self. They walked the High Line on a Wednesday evening, the skyline burning pink and gold beyond the Hudson, their breath making small clouds in the cold. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. It was a quiet thing. No announcement. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt it move through her like warm water. Slow and total, she kept her eyes forward on the skyline, on the river, on anything but his face. You've gone quiet, he said. I'm always quiet. Not like this, he said. His thumb moved gently across her knuckles. This is different quiet. She looked down at their hands. His pale fingers threaded through her dark ones, and the simplicity of it, the complete, uncomplicated naturalness of it, pressed against something tender inside her. I don't know how to do this anymore, she said quietly. The honesty of it surprised even her. I built very good walls, Charles. Very deliberately. I know. His voice was soft. I've been standing outside them for 4 months. Doesn't that exhaust you? He turned to look at her fully, the High Line lights catching the blue of his eyes. You want to know what exhausts me? The thought of walking away. He paused. I'd rather stand outside your walls forever than be comfortable somewhere else. She looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. Then she leaned in and rested her head against his shoulder. He went very still, like a man who had been handed something precious and was afraid to breathe wrong. The city burned below them in 1,000 lights. She introduced him to Simone on a Sunday. She had prepared herself for resistance. Simone was perceptive and protective, and 19 in the way that made her simultaneously ancient and fierce. Jennifer had rehearsed the conversation 3 times in the bathroom mirror. Simone took one look at Charles standing in their Harlem apartment doorway and turned to her mother with an expression that said, really, Mom, so loudly it didn't require words. Dinner was initially careful, polite. Charles asked Simone about her studies with genuine interest, and Simone answered with measured warmth, watching him the way a young woman watched a man who was attempting to enter her mother's life. Then he made a terrible joke about pre-med coursework, and Simone's face cracked into reluctant laughter, and the temperature of the room changed entirely. Later, washing dishes, Simone appeared beside Jennifer and spoke low. He looks at you like you're the whole room. Jennifer kept her eyes on the sink. Don't, Mom, Simone said. Her voice was gentle and serious both. When is the last time someone looked at you like that? Jennifer didn't answer. Simone dried the dish in her hand and said nothing more. But when she passed Charles on her way out, she touched his arm briefly. The smallest, most deliberate gesture of approval, and Jennifer saw it and had to turn back to the sink. He introduced her to his daughters on a Saturday in Tribeca. Maya, 11, with her father's blue eyes and her late mother's curls, shook Jennifer's hand with solemn seriousness, and then immediately asked if she was a real doctor who had seen real blood, which broke the tension entirely. Lily, 8, climbed into Jennifer's lap within 20 minutes. Just like that, Jennifer sat very still in Charles's living room, with this small, warm child settled comfortably against her chest, and something broke open in her so quietly that no one in the room could have heard it. Her arms closed around Lily carefully, the way you held something you hadn't known you were missing. She looked up and found Charles watching her from across the room. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the Christmas lights behind him. She looked away first. That night he drove her home through the glittering city, and they sat outside her building in the idling car longer than was necessary. "Your girls are beautiful," she said. "They liked you. Lily sat on me within 20 minutes. "Lily doesn't do that," he said. His voice was quiet. "She hasn't done that with anyone since her mother." The city hummed around them. A cab leaned on its horn somewhere on 7th Avenue. Jennifer looked at her hands in her lap. Her chest was full of something enormous and unfamiliar, the terrifying, specific weight of realizing you cannot remember life before someone. "And it has only been 4 months. Charles?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know," he said softly. "I can't breathe without you anymore." The words arrived before she could stop them. Raw and real and completely unretractable. "I don't know when that happened, and it frightens me." He reached across the console and took her face in both hands, gently, the way you held something irreplaceable. She let him. That alone was enormous. She had not let anyone hold her face in a very long time. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her that had been locked for 14 years simply, quietly opened. She leaned forward slowly. So did he. The kiss was soft, unhurried, nothing like desperation, and everything like arrival. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were closed a moment longer than hers. When he opened them, what she saw there was undone and certain all at once. She reached up and covered one of his hands with hers, still against her face, and held it there. Outside, New York burned and blazed, and refused to sleep. And inside that quiet car, Jennifer Carlson let herself be loved, for the first time in 14 years. The dinner was Charles's idea. He had been careful about it, patient in the way he was patient about everything concerning her. He hadn't pushed. He'd simply said one evening over the phone, "I want you to meet Anthony when you're ready." And she had said all right with the quiet certainty of a woman who had decided to stop running from the things that mattered. She wore a deep burgundy dress she hadn't worn in 2 years. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror and looked at herself. 49 years old, dark eyes, silver threaded through her curls like something earned, and practiced not being nervous. It didn't fully work. Simone appeared in the doorway. "You look beautiful, Mom." "I look like a woman who is overthinking a dinner." "Same thing," Simone said. She crossed her arms. "He's going to love you." "It's the brother, Simone." "Not him." "Right," Simone said. Her mouth curved. "And you're not nervous at all." Charles's Tribeca apartment was warm and smelled of garlic and rosemary. He had cooked, actually cooked, and the table was set with the unpretentious effort of a man who wanted the evening to matter without making it a performance. Anthony was already there when she arrived. He stood from the couch, and Jennifer saw him fully for the first time, outside the fluorescent exhaustion of a hospital corridor. Tall, composed, light brown skin, dark eyes that were careful, and assessing in a way that reminded her, faintly and inexplicably, of looking in a mirror. He was handsome in a quiet, serious way. He extended his hand. "Dr. Carlson," he said, "Charles talks about you constantly." His tone was measured. Not warm, not cold, precise. "Jennifer, please," she said. She shook his hand. "And I hope some of it was unflattering. Keeps me human." Something shifted almost imperceptibly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. They sat for dinner. The evening moved carefully. Conversation found its footing slowly, Charles carrying most of it with the practiced ease of a man who loved both people at the table and needed them not to feel like strangers. He talked business with Anthony, medicine with Jennifer, and wove them together with the subtle skill of someone who had thought about this evening for weeks. Jennifer watched Anthony when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about him she couldn't locate. Something that sat at the edge of recognition without ever arriving. A quality in the way he held himself. Dignified, self-contained, carrying something quiet and unresolved behind his eyes. She had seen that quality before. She saw it every morning in her own reflection. She dismissed the thought. After dessert, Charles disappeared into the kitchen. The silence between Jennifer and Anthony settled. Without hostility, but without ease. "How long have you and Charles known each other?" Anthony asked. "About 5 months." He nodded slowly, turning his wine glass by the stem. "He seems happy," he said. He said it factually, as though happiness in his brother was data he was still processing. "I hope so." He looked at her then directly, without apology. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "I prefer honest." "The age gap doesn't concern you." She held his gaze without flinching. "It concerned me enormously. For months, it still surfaces sometimes." She paused. "What concerns you more, the gap or something else?" A beat of silence. "He's my brother," Anthony said simply. "Finally, he's all I have. I need to know that whoever is in his life." He stopped, reset. He's been through enough. "So has she," Charles said from the kitchen doorway, leaning against it with a dish towel over his shoulder, voice quiet and absolute. Anthony looked at his brother. Something passed between them. The entire compressed language of two people who had been each other's family long before anyone else arrived. Later, Charles walked Anthony to the door while Jennifer gathered her coat. She heard their voices in the hallway. "Low private, the particular register of brothers." "Are you okay?" Anthony said. "She's older than you, Charles. I just want to make sure you've thought." "I've thought about nothing else for 5 months," Charles said. His voice was calm and certain. "She's extraordinary, Anthony. She's the most real person I've ever known." A long pause. "She makes you happy." "She makes me feel like myself." The silence stretched. Jennifer stood very still in the living room, her coat in her hands, not meaning to listen and unable to stop. Then Anthony's voice came quieter, something in it softening at the edges. "You're my brother. Whatever makes you happy, I'm fully okay with it." She heard them embrace, the brief, solid sound of it. Charles came back into the living room and found her standing there, and he knew immediately from her face that she had heard. He said nothing, just crossed the room and took her coat gently from her hands and held it open for her. She slid her arms in. His hands rested briefly on her shoulders. "He loves you," she said softly. "We're all we've got," Charles said. "Always have been." She turned to face him and saw it, the fullness of what that meant. Two brothers who had become each other's entire world. The weight of that. The beauty of it. Something moved deep inside her, wordless and ancient. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her hand. "Take me home," she said quietly. It was past 2 in the morning. The jazz had been playing for hours, low and unhurried from the small speaker on her bookshelf. The kind of music that didn't demand anything, just existed. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. One empty, one forgotten. The lamp in the corner threw everything in amber. Jennifer was leaning against Charles on the couch, her feet tucked beneath her, his arm around her with the easy permanence of something that had stopped being a decision and become simply a fact. Her head rested against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat. Slow and steady, she had started finding it difficult to remember evenings without that sound. That frightened her when she thought about it directly. She had been quiet for a while. Outside, a car moved slowly down the avenue, its headlights drawing a long, pale stroke across her ceiling. She watched it travel the full width of the room and disappear. "You've gone somewhere," he said softly into her hair. "I'm here." "Your body is here," he said. His thumb moved gently across her shoulder. "Where's the rest of you?" She was quiet a moment longer. Then she lifted her head and looked at him. In the amber light, his face was open and unhurried. No performance, just presence. "Can I ask you something? Always." She looked at him carefully, measuring. "You and Anthony." She paused. "You're white, Charles." Another pause. "He isn't." He looked at her. Something in him settled. The particular settling of a man deciding to hand someone something real. "We were both adopted," he said quietly. "Different birth families. Our parents chose us separately and raised us as brothers." A breath. "After they passed, it's just been the two of us against the world." She held very still. "My mother used to say she built her family the way some people built gardens," he said. His voice softened. "Not matching, just beautiful together." Jennifer said nothing. She looked away from him. At the dark window, at the city outside that never fully slept, its amber glow pressed against the glass. Both adopted, The words moved through her slowly, like cold water finding every crack, touching something deep and unexamined, something she kept in a locked room inside herself, and visited only in the small hours when the discipline that ran her days had finally, briefly, loosened its grip. Her chest tightened. "Jennifer," his voice was gentle, "where did you go just now?" She opened her mouth, closed it. She had carried this for 30 years without setting it down in front of anyone. Not a colleague, not a friend, not the man she had been married to for 5 years. Only Simone knew, because a daughter deserved the truth of her mother. But something about this moment, the late hour, the jazz, the amber light, this man saying the word adopted like an ordinary thing, cracked something open at her very foundation. "I had a baby," she said, "when I was 19. The room changed. Charles became completely still. Not tense, present, the specific, total presence of a man who understood that what was arriving required everything he had. A boy. Her voice was steady, the way things were steady. When they had been held in the dark for decades, I had nothing, no money, no family behind me. "The man responsible," she said. Her jaw tightened. He looked me in the face and denied his own child. Charles said nothing. His hand found hers in the dark and closed around it. "I held him once," she said. Her voice fractured at its edges, just barely. "I counted his fingers. I kissed his forehead. I memorized the warmth of him." Her throat worked. "And then I signed the paper because I loved him more than I loved my right to keep him. I was 19 and alone and terrified, and I had to believe that someone else could give him what I couldn't." The siren outside faded to nothing. "I went back 6 months later," she said. The words came out stripped and raw. "When I had found some footing. The agency said the adoption was closed. Records sealed. My boy was gone and there was no door left." She exhaled 30 years in a single breath. "I won a scholarship, became a doctor, built everything you see, and every single year I wrote him a letter and left it with agencies, hoping that one day he would look for me, that he would need to know." Charles brought her hand to his lips, pressed them there and held them. 30 years, she whispered. He would be 30 years old now. "I don't know his face. I don't know his name. I don't know if he's healthy or if he hates me, or if he has ever once." She stopped. The sentence was too large to finish. The tears came quietly. No collapse, no performance. Just the silent, dignified grief of a woman who had run out of places to put it. Charles pulled her into him completely. Both arms, no hesitation. She pressed her face against his chest and felt something release in her that she hadn't known was still clenched. "You were 19 years old," he said. His voice was low and fierce. "You were a child making an impossible decision completely alone." His arms tightened. "That is not abandonment. That is the most devastating kind of love there is." She shook against him. "I just need him to know I never stopped," she managed. "Wherever he is, I just need him to know that not one day passed." "He'll know," Charles said, quiet and absolute. They stayed like that while the jazz played on, low and blue, and the city murmured endlessly outside. At some point the shaking stopped. The tears dried. "You're the first person I've told," she said quietly. "Outside of Simone." "I thought so. How?" "Because of the way it came out of you," he said. His hand moved slowly through her curls, like something that had never had air before. She closed her eyes. She thought about a boy with her eyes somewhere in this enormous city. She thought about the word adopted sitting quiet and heavy in the dark, between what she knew and what she was afraid to know. The thought arrived softly, almost gently. She let it pass. She pressed closer to Charles and breathed. It came on a Tuesday evening in February. Jennifer was in her office between rounds, the door half closed, a cold cup of coffee at her elbow, and a stack of patient files she had been working through since 6 a.m. The winter light came through the window, thin and pale, the kind of February light that made Manhattan look like a photograph of itself. She had her reading glasses on and her curls pinned up, and she was, for once, simply present in an ordinary moment. Her personal phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had a policy about unknown numbers during working hours, a necessary boundary built from years of being too accessible to too many people. Her thumb hovered. She answered. "Hello?" Silence. Not empty silence, inhabited silence, the kind where someone is present and struggling. "Hello," she said again, sitting forward slightly. Then a voice, male, deep and careful, each word placed like something fragile. "I found letters," he said. "Letters left with an agency." A long pause. "There was a name in them." A name she gave her baby before she let him go. Jennifer stood up. She didn't decide to. Her body simply rose, the way bodies responded to seismic things, seeking ground that wasn't moving even when none was available. Her glasses fell from her fingers onto the desk. The patient files ceased to exist. "Elijah," she whispered. The silence on the line cracked open. "Yes," he said. His voice broke completely on that single syllable. Just that one word, and 30 years collapsed inside it. And she broke with it. Not quietly, not with dignity. The sound that left her was something she had no control over. 30 years of waiting rushing out of her chest all at once, raw and unstoppable, the way water moved when a dam finally gave. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, but it did nothing. The tears came in a wave that took her completely. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm sorry, It's okay," he said. His voice was thick, unsteady. She could hear him crying too, quietly. The way men cried when they had spent a lifetime learning to do it without sound. "It's okay." They stayed on the line crying together for a long wordless moment. A mother and her son, 30 years and however many blocks of Manhattan between them, falling apart in the exact same way at the exact same time. She pressed her back against the wall and slid down it slowly until she was sitting on the floor of her office, knees drawn up, phone pressed hard against her ear, as though closing even an inch of distance between them. "I have letters," she managed finally, her voice wrecked and searching. 12 of them. Did they give you?" "I got them," he said. He was barely holding it together. She could hear the effort of it, the enormous muscular work of a man trying to stay upright. Inside something that was taking his legs out. All 12 of them. "I've read them," a breath. "I've read them many times." She turned her face toward the ceiling. The pale February light blurred completely. "I looked for you," she said, her voice stripped to its bones. "I went back. They said the records were sealed. I never stopped. I need you to know I never stopped looking." "I know." His voice was thick. "The letters, I know." They stayed on the line, breathing together for a moment. Two strangers who were not strangers, separated by 30 years, and currently by however many blocks of Manhattan lay between them. "I'd like to meet you," he said finally. Careful again, composed again, holding himself with that quiet, tremendous dignity she would come to recognize as entirely his own. "Yes," she said immediately. "Without negotiation. Without conditions, yes, wherever you want, whenever. There's a coffee shop, West Village. I can send you the address." A pause. Tonight, she confirmed. After she hung up, she stayed on the floor of her office for a long time without moving, back against the wall, phone in her lap, the February light thin and pale through the window above her. She closed her eyes and felt tears run down her cheeks in the silence of the empty room. Then she called Charles. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" he called. Her voice came out strange and small. "Charles," he called. A beat of complete silence. "Your son. He found my letters and he called me. And we're meeting tonight and I don't—" Her voice finally fractured. "I don't know how to, Jennifer." His voice was steady and immediate. "Breathe," she breathed. "I'm coming to get you. I'm at the hospital. I have 3 more hours of— I'm coming after. We'll drive somewhere, and you can fall apart as much as you need to." A pause, softer. "You're not doing this alone. You hear me?" She closed her eyes. She exhaled the longest breath of her life. Tonight arrived grey and cold. Charles drove. She sat in the passenger seat watching the city pass. The West Village streets narrowing and quieting as they crossed downtown. Brownstones and bare trees, and the particular stillness of an evening that hadn't yet found its noise. She hadn't rested since the call. He reached across and took her hand without looking away from the road. She held it with both of hers. "What if he's angry?" she said quietly. "Then you let him be angry, and you stay. What if I see him and I just—" She stopped. "Fall apart? Yes, then you fall apart, and I'll be right here when you need to be put back together." He glanced at her briefly. The blue of his eyes was warm and absolute. "You've been waiting 30 years for this, Jennifer. You don't have to be strong tonight. You just have to show up." She nodded. Her throat was too full for words. He pulled onto the quiet West Village street and slowed the car. She saw the coffee shop, small, warm-lit, steam on the windows from the cold outside. She saw a figure already inside through the glass. Tall, composed, light brown skin, sitting with his hands folded on the table, waiting. Her heart stopped completely. Charles turned off the engine. The silence of the car settled around them. "I'll park right here," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. You take all the time you need and I'll be in this seat when you come out." She looked at him. Then she reached for the door, stepped out into the February cold, walked toward the glass door. The figure inside looked up, and the world, in one devastating, glorious, world-ending moment, stopped completely still. The moment Charles walked through that coffee shop door, everything changed. He had not planned to come inside. He had promised himself he would wait in the car, give them their space, their privacy, their 30 years of distance, finally collapsing into the same room. But when Jennifer had walked through that glass door and stopped completely still, and he had seen her shoulders begin to shake from the car, he had been out of his seat before the thought had fully formed. He pushed through the door and saw Anthony, standing now, having risen from his chair the moment Jennifer walked in. Tall, composed, light brown skin, dark, careful eyes that found Jennifer's face and stayed there with an expression Charles had never seen on his brother before. Raw and unguarded, terrified and desperate, all of it at once. Charles stopped walking. The world tilted. He looked at his brother. He looked at Jennifer. He looked at his brother again. The architecture of 30 years rearranged itself in a single silent moment. "Anthony," he said. His voice came out barely above a whisper. His brother turned, and Charles watched it happen, watched the recognition detonate across Anthony's face as he looked between Jennifer and Charles, the connections firing, the impossible geometry of it assembling itself in real time. His brother's chest rose and fell once deeply, like a man who had been struck. "No," Anthony said quietly, as though refusing a verdict. Jennifer's hand was over her mouth. Her eyes moved between them, between the man she loved and the son she had lost, and the color drained from her face as the truth arrived fully, and finally and with no mercy whatsoever. Charles stood completely still. "She's your mother," he said slowly, not a question. The pieces assembling themselves with terrible clarity. "Anthony, she is your mother." Anthony said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The three of them stood in a West Village coffee shop on a cold February night, while 30 years of lost time and 5 months of love and a lifetime of impossible coincidence crashed together in the small, warm space between them. She made it through the drive home. She made it through Charles walking her to her door, his hand steady at the small of her back, his voice quiet and careful, asking 3 times if she was all right and accepting her nod each time, even though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She made it through saying good night, through closing the door, through Simone appearing in the hallway with searching eyes, and Jennifer saying, "I'm okay, baby. Go to sleep," with just enough steadiness to be believed. She made it to her bedroom. She closed the door, and then her legs simply gave. Not dramatically, not in collapse. They folded beneath her the way things folded, when they had been holding weight for too long, and she found herself on the floor beside her bed, on her knees in the dark, with the city murmuring 5 floors below, and the whole enormous night pressing close around her. She pressed her hands together. She had not prayed like this in years, not kneeling, not undone, not with everything stripped away and nothing left, but the raw, unfiltered truth of what she was feeling. "Thank you, Lord," she said. 3 words, barely above a whisper, but they carried everything. "Thank you for keeping him. Thank you for keeping him alive and whole, and healthy and standing." She broke. God, he was standing there, and he was so beautiful and so strong. She pressed her fist against her lips, steadied herself. "Thank you for the Morrisons, for those people I never met, who are gone now and I never got to tell them. Thank them for taking my baby and choosing him, for raising him into that man, that dignified, serious, careful, wonderful man." Her voice broke open. "They did what I couldn't. They gave him what I couldn't, and they did it beautifully. Please, wherever they are, let them know. Let them know I am so grateful I don't have words for it. Let them know I see their work in everything he is." The tears came freely now, streaming without restraint, dropping onto her clasped hands in the dark. I have spent 30 years asking you why. Why you let me be 19 and alone, and why he had to pay for circumstances he never chose, and why I had to spend every November for 30 years, not knowing if he was cold or hungry or loved. She exhaled shakily. I'm not asking why anymore. I'm just saying thank you, Father, for the detour, for all of it, because it brought him here. It brought him to me. And I got to stand across from him today and see my own eyes looking back at me. She broke completely. She wept, the way she had not allowed herself to weep in 30 years, without dignity, without composure, without the careful containment that had kept her functional and upright. Through every hard thing her life had handed her, she wept for the girl she had been at 19. She wept for every letter dropped into silence. She wept for every November, for every face in every crowd she had searched without meaning to. She wept until she was empty. And then quietly, in the stillness that followed, whatever comes next, she whispered, whatever it costs, whatever this asks of all of us, I will accept it, because you gave him back to me. You gave my son back to me, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that. She stayed on her knees in the dark for a long time after the words ran out. The city outside was quiet in the way it was only ever quiet at this hour. Not silent, never silent, but low and breathing, like something alive and patient. And in the stillness, the grief that had lived inside her for 30 years, the grief of a woman who had once faced an impossible choice, and never fully forgiven herself for it, slowly, finally began to loosen, not disappear. It would never fully disappear, but loosen, like a fist opening, finger by finger. After 30 years, she rose from the floor slowly, moved to the window, and looked out at the city that had held both of them. Separately, unknowingly, all this time, her son was out there somewhere in those lights tonight. He was alive. He was whole.
Finding him wasn't the end of her story. It was love.
3 weeks later, Anthony came to Jennifer's apartment alone. She had been expecting it. Not the timing, not the words, but the inevitability of it. A son who had questions that could only be answered by the woman who had left them unanswered for 30 years. She opened the door and stepped back to let him in. He didn't sit. He stood in her living room with his coat still on, hands in his pockets, looking at her with the careful eyes of a man assembling his courage word by word. She waited. She owed him that. I read your letters, he said finally. All 12 of them. Multiple times he paused. I believe you loved me. I need you to know I believe that. Anthony, I'm not finished. His voice was controlled, but barely. I spent 30 years with a question where a mother should have been. 30 years of looking at other people's families and wondering what mine looked like. What you looked like. His jaw tightened. I built a life. A good life. I made peace or something close enough to it. She stood completely still. And then I find you, he said, his voice fractured at the edges. I finally find you, and you are everything I hoped. You are strong and brilliant, and you clearly love your children. And I looked at you in that coffee shop and I thought, he stopped, pressed his fingers briefly to his forehead. I thought, there she is. There is the answer. Her eyes filled, but then Charles walked through that door. The fracture in his voice deepened into something raw, and everything I thought I was receiving got taken back in the same moment. I didn't know, she whispered. Anthony, I swear to you I didn't know. I know you didn't, he said. He looked directly at her now, and what was in his eyes was not anger. It was something far more painful than anger. It was grief wearing the face of a 30-year-old man. But I need to say this to you. I need you to hear it. She nodded. Her throat was too full for words. You don't get to walk back into my life and rearrange it like this. His voice broke completely on the last word, and he let it break. Standing there with his coat on in her Harlem living room, no longer trying to contain it. I spent 30 years not knowing you. 30 years wondering. Now I find you, and I'm supposed to lose my brother too. He's all I have. He has always been all I have. The tears came down her face silently. You are not losing him, she managed. He's in love with my mother. His voice was raw. Do you understand how that sentence sounds? Do you understand what you are asking me to simply accept? She crossed the room slowly. She did not reach for him. She had not yet earned that. She simply stood close enough that he could see her face fully. Every year of grief and guilt written plainly across it. I know what I'm asking. and I have no right to ask it. She paused. But I need you to know that finding you is the greatest gift of my entire life. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, nothing changes that. He looked at her for a long, devastated moment. Then he walked out. That same week he went to Charles. He let himself into the Tribeca apartment with his key and found his brother in the kitchen. Charles took one look at his face and turned the stove off. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Anthony was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You need to end it." Charles held his gaze steadily. "No, Charles." His voice was controlled and absolute. "She is my mother. You are my brother. What you are asking me to live with. I'm not asking you to live with anything you haven't already been living with. You approved of her before you knew. That was before." "She is the same woman," Charles said. He leaned forward. "She is the same extraordinary woman she was the night you shook her hand at dinner and told me whatever makes me happy you're okay with. She hasn't changed. The situation changed. The situation changes everything. Not for me." Anthony stood, moved to the window. The city spread below them, grey and indifferent. "I finally found my mother," he said quietly, his back to Charles. "And she turns out to be the woman my brother is in love with. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He stopped. His shoulders rose and fell. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Charles. I cannot find the place where this becomes okay." Charles crossed the room and stood beside him. I know this is impossible and unfair, and I would not wish it on you." He paused. "But I love her. I am not capable of walking away from her. And I need my brother." His voice dropped. "I need both of you. I refuse to accept that I have to choose." Anthony stared at the city below. "I need time," he said finally, hollow and exhausted. "Take it, take all of it. I'm not going anywhere." That night Charles drove to Harlem and found Jennifer sitting at her kitchen table in the dark. He sat across from her without turning on the light. "He came to see me," she said. She didn't need to say which one. Me too. The city hummed quietly outside her window. "He told me to end it," Charles said. She looked at her hands. "Maybe he's right." "He's not." He reached across the table and covered her hands with his. "He's hurting. He's allowed to hurt. But he is not right." She looked up at him. This man who had refused every exit she had ever offered him, who sat with her in the dark without asking her to perform being okay. "We're going to be okay," he said softly. He said it for both of them. He pressed his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. Outside, New York moved through its relentless February dark, and the space between where they were and where they needed to be felt enormous and necessary, possibly uncrossable. It was Anthony who broke first. 6 months after the West Village coffee shop, on a quiet October evening, he appeared at Jennifer's door alone. No call ahead, no warning, just a man standing in a Harlem hallway with his hands in his coat pockets and something in his eyes that had finally exhausted itself. She opened the door and looked at him. He looked at her, at this woman with warm brown skin and silver-threaded curls, and deep-set eyes that were entirely, unmistakably, heartbreakingly his own, and his carefully constructed composure simply gave way. "I owe you something," he said. His voice was rough. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," he swallowed hard. "I've been so focused on what this costs me that I forgot to ask what it cost you." He looked away briefly, jaw working. 30 years of not knowing if I was alive. 30 years of letters to a silence that never wrote back. He looked at her again. "That is not nothing. That is everything." Jennifer's eyes filled immediately. "Anthony, I'm not finished," he said. He pressed forward before his courage failed him. "I spent my whole life with a question where a mother should have been. And then I find you, and you're extraordinary. You're a doctor, and you're strong, and you love your children fiercely, and you're exactly—" His voice fractured. "You're exactly what I always hoped you might be." She pressed her hand over her mouth. "And Charles?" He stopped. "Started again. He's my brother. My whole life he has been my entire family. And he loves you in a way I have never seen him love anything." He exhaled, long and unsteady. "I can't be the one that stands between something that real." She crossed the threshold and put her arms around her son. He stood rigid for just a moment, the last resistance of a man who had protected himself for 30 years. And then his arms came around her, and he held on, with the totality of someone who had been waiting, without knowing it, his entire life. They stood in the Harlem doorway and held, each other while 30 years of silence finally, mercifully ended. Charles proposed on a Thursday evening in November. He had told no one. No elaborate planning, no restaurant reservation, no audience. Just the two of them on their path, near the Central Park Reservoir, the same path where she had laughed for the first time in years and frightened herself with the sound of it. The first snow of the season was falling, soft and unhurried, the way the best things arrived. They walked in their usual silence, the comfortable, inhabited silence that had become one of her favorite places to exist, her hand in his. The city rising white and glittering beyond the tree line, the park hushed and cathedral still beneath the snow. He stopped walking. She felt his hand change in hers, a subtle shift in grip, something intentional, and she turned to look at him. He was already lowering himself to one knee in the snow. Charles. Her voice left her entirely. He looked up at her, blue eyes bright with snow and certainty. This man who had stood outside her walls for 4 months and never once raised his voice to get in, who had held her while 30 years of grief came out of her at 2 in the morning, who had sat with the most complicated revelation of both their lives and never once let go of her hand. "I knew the night I opened my eyes in that hospital room," he said quietly. "You walked in and the whole room recalibrated. I didn't know what it meant then. I know now," he paused. "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You are stubborn and brilliant, and you carry more than anyone should have to carry. And you do it with a grace that humbles me." His voice dropped lower. "I don't want to spend another day not being your husband." The snow fell between them, soft and indifferent and beautiful. "Jennifer Carlson," he said. He reached into his coat pocket. A simple ring, elegant, unshowy, exactly right. "Will you marry me?" She stood in the first snow of November in Central Park and looked at this man kneeling in the cold with his whole heart completely exposed. "You are a ridiculous man," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "You are 14 years younger than me." "Irrelevant. I have a daughter and you have 2 daughters, and a brother who is also my son, Jennifer. And our family is the most complicated thing that has ever existed." "Jennifer." His voice was soft and absolute. She stopped. "Yes," she said. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, and she took his face in both her hands and kissed him in the falling snow, while Central Park held its beautiful, indifferent silence around them. They married in a small chapel in Brooklyn, on a Saturday in March. Simone stood at Jennifer's side. Maya and Lily wore white dresses and scattered petals with the solemn joyfulness of girls who finally had what they had needed. Charles stood at the altar in a dark suit, and the look on his face when she appeared at the back of the chapel made several people reach for their handkerchiefs immediately. Anthony walked her down the aisle. He offered his arm at the chapel door with the quiet dignity that was entirely, completely his own, and she took it, and they walked together past the candlelight and the small gathering of people who loved them toward the man waiting at the altar. Halfway down the aisle, Anthony leaned slightly toward her. "He's a good man," he said softly. "I know," she whispered. "And he paused, steadied himself. "You're a good mother." She gripped his arm, smiling, and kept walking. The chapel went completely still. Charles took her hands at the altar and looked at her the way he had looked at her from a hospital bed at his worst moment, like she was the clearest thing in the room. "I spent 35 years not knowing a love could feel like solid ground," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the brightness in his eyes. "And then you walked in and saved my life. And I don't just mean that night in the ER, a breath. I mean every day after. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. And I will spend whatever time God gives me making sure you never forget that. I choose you, Jennifer. Every complicated, beautiful, stubborn inch of you. Today and every day after." She pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "I stopped believing love was for me," she said softly. "For 14 years I was completely certain." Her voice broke at the edges and she let it. "And then you refused to let me disappear. You stood outside every wall I built, and you never once raised your voice." She squeezed his hands. "You gave me back to myself, Charles. I choose you. I choose all of it." The officiant smiled. "You may kiss your bride." He cupped her face gently in both hands and kissed her. Slow, reverent, complete, while the small chapel erupted around them. Anthony was the first to stand, At the reception, late in the evening, the dancing long and loose and the candles burning low, Jennifer stood at the window with a glass of champagne and looked out at the Brooklyn night. The bridge lit gold across the water, the city sprawling endless and luminous in every direction. 30 years ago, she had been 19 and alone and terrified, signing a paper in a room that smelled of antiseptic, kissing a forehead she believed she would never see again. Tonight, her son had walked her down the aisle. Tonight, her daughters, all three of them, were dancing together in a circle in the middle of the floor. Tonight, the man she had never meant to love, had never believed she deserved, was crossing the room toward her with that unhurried certainty that had dismantled every wall she had ever built. He stood beside her at the window, took her hand. They looked out at New York together, this impossible, relentless, magnificent city that had held all of them, separately and then together, through everything. "You okay?" he asked softly. She looked at her son laughing across the room. She looked at her daughters spinning in the candlelight. She looked at this man beside her who had refused, with extraordinary stubbornness and extraordinary love, to let her disappear. "Yes," she said. That night the girls were asleep. The apartment was theirs. Jennifer stood at the bedroom mirror, removing her earrings when Charles appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, watching her with that look she had spent so long refusing to believe she deserved. "Come here," he said softly. She turned. He crossed the room and took her face in his hands the way he always did, like something irreplaceable, and kissed her slowly without urgency, the kind of kiss that had nowhere else to be. She felt herself soften completely, her hands finding the front of his shirt, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. "I love you," he said against her mouth. "I know," she said. She smiled into the kiss. "I love you back." He walked her slowly toward the bed, and the city outside dimmed to a murmur. And for a long while there was nothing in the world except the two of them, his hands gentle and certain, her breath warm against his neck, their bodies finding the unhurried rhythm of people who had learned each other completely and were still somehow discovering more. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, his fingers moving slowly through her curls. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The next morning, the backyard of their Brooklyn home was chaos, and it was perfect. Lily, 9, was shrieking with laughter, chasing Maya across the grass with a water gun she absolutely was not supposed to have. Maya, 12, was screaming betrayal at the top of her lungs. Simone, 20, was supposed to be the responsible adult supervising. She was currently soaked and losing badly. Anthony stood in the middle of all of it, laughing, really laughing, the full unguarded kind, as all three of them turned on him simultaneously. "Oh no," was all he managed before they descended. Jennifer watched from the porch steps, coffee warm in both hands, the morning light falling gold across everything. Charles sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, watching his brother get absolutely destroyed by 3 determined young women. "Look at that," he said quietly. She looked, her son, her daughters, her husband, her family, improbable, complicated, wholly completely hers. "Yeah," she said softly. She leaned into him and smiled, and for the first time in 30 years, she meant it without reservation. The city burned gold and endless beyond the glass, and Jennifer Carlson, who had built everything from nothing, who had never stopped searching, who had finally improbably been found, leaned her head against her husband's shoulder and breathed.
Sometimes people don't make choices because they want to, they make them because they feel like they have no choice. Those choices don't disappear with time. They echo through lives, shaping everything that comes after. If you came across Jennifer's story, I hope it gives you compassion.